Hello, and welcome to this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors and Cazoo, with Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters.
Hello and welcome to this Motor Trade Radio weekday special. We're delighted to welcome back Jeremy Yea, Senior Valuations Editor at CapHPI, and he's joining us for this exclusive roundup of how trade values performed in February. Now, by way of a quick recap, last month, CapHPI reported a movement of minus 0.2% in January, which was very much in line with the average for the month, and an improvement on the minus 1.8% drop in December. In this episode, we'll look at how February's trade values performed, a month which typically sees a small rise. We'll also take a closer look at some of the key trends across vehicle sectors and fuel types. And Jeremy will also share some of his thoughts on how trade values are likely to perform in March and beyond. So welcome back to the pod, Jeremy. Great to have you back on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Good morning, gents.
Good morning. Good morning. Yeah, great. So you're partway through the first quarter now, March on the horizon in a matter of days now, Jeremy. So it's flying through the year.
Absolutely. I can't believe we're already staring down the barrel of March. It just feels not very long ago. We're all sat around eating our Christmas dinner and celebrating the new year. And so, yeah, it's gone mighty fast.
It does. But well, let's get straight into it. I mean, as usual, talk us through the headline trade value movement at that 3-year 60 benchmark and how that figure does compare to previous February into March movements that you've seen previously.
Yeah. So February live values into March monthly. That equated to a 3-year 60 down at 0.4%, which is against the backdrop or a seasonal average of a 0.4 increase. So it is obviously a bit less than what it has been in previous months, previous years, and even against the seasonal average. But I think there's a lot driving that. That 0.4 equates to around about just under £75. And yeah, it's been a very interesting month in terms of historic, in terms of previous years. Last year it increased 0.4, up 0.4%. 2024 it was up 0.7, and in 2023 it was up 1%. This movement actually registers only the third time it's dropped since we've been registered with Cap Live Value, since going back to 2012. So yeah, slightly unusual.
Well, as you say, Jeremy, slightly unusual, and we'll start to dig into what actually drove that. But before we look specifically at fuel trends, which is always that hot topic when we catch up with you, it was only a small movement this month, but there were some notable price movements by both age and price points. Can you talk us through some of those?
Yeah, sure. So 1 year 10K, it dropped 0.6%, which equates to £193. At 5 years, so once we get to the 5-year point, it is slightly more positive. So it was a flat movement at 5-year 80. And once we get to between 5 and 10 years, it was up 1% overall. So the older side of the market is definitely more positive, but we know probably reasons for that. There's obviously a lot less vehicles between that 5 to 7 to 8 years old and beyond because of the COVID impact. So yeah, the older end of the market, strong, and the continuation from January really, with the younger age 3 years or sub 3 years, slightly more of a negative.
And that is a trend we have seen over quite a few months now, isn't it? In terms of those older vehicles, either holding their value or increasing slightly.
Yeah, I think that the price point part of the market, I think that's really hot. It's really the hot ticket. I think lots of retailers across the whole market, and that could be anything from independent supermarkets and even franchise dealers looking to buy price range vehicles. And I think that's why that end of the market, or the older part of the market, is really quite interesting in terms of the movement, and mostly positive.
And how did the various vehicle sectors perform. I couldn't help but notice that despite the appalling weather we've had so far this year, it was actually a good month for convertibles as well as coupes and cabriolets, wasn't it?
I think it shocked us all. I don't think we expected with the deluge of rain we've had all over the
Yeah.
country and the mixed weather and flooding and what have you, that cabriolets would go up in a month where it's been pretty grey and miserable. So yeah, at 3 years, convertible went up 0.5% and coupe cabriolet went up almost 1%. So yeah, very unusual. But yeah, looking at some of the other sectors, a bit more mixed, I would say, across the board. SUV was down 0.5%. Lower medium, so the hatchback sector, that was down 0.8%. But we did have some increases. There was a small increase with City Car, which was up 0.1%, and Super Mini, which is obviously quite another big sector, big mainstream sector, that was down 0.2%. So quite a varied mix in terms of movements there. And I think probably goes to the point of the price range market of certain price points and price bandings are really quite good news.
We must have optimistic dealers hoping for the weather to turn or banking on a hot summer and stocking up early, Jeremy, for the convertible purchases.
Absolutely. Look, they're a real rarity now, aren't they? There's lots of manufacturers who are not making convertibles anymore, and I think at certain age points, they are rare, but people still like to drive convertibles. So I think some of them can look quite cheap as well when you look at them in terms of monetary value, and you think, well, why wouldn't you? So we all need a bit of positivity in the minute in terms of the weather. So why not put a convertible in the showroom or wherever, and yeah, hopefully you'll get someone who's going to be like-minded, wants a bit of positivity in their life as well.
Yeah, as you say, I think looking at the data that you guys produce, the volume and model derivatives of coupe, cabs and convertibles is very much a different picture than it was a decade ago. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, just turning to fuel types. I mean, let's start off with the electric vehicle market, BEVs. You're now seeing record used car volumes feeding into the sold data that you receive. I mean, what impact is that having on values in this sort of first quarter and in February into March?
Well, because of the volume you mentioned, and we have seen a record increase in January. It's been our highest levels of data into the business for January, which surpasses it by probably another 30% of what we've had in previous. So it's around 15,000 records just for January alone. February is probably going to look to be relatively close to that figure as well. The previous volume of data, the highest volume of data we had was back in July last year, and that was 12,000 records. So it has surpassed it by a further 3,000 records, which is probably not surprising, bearing in mind, I think the younger ages are now, the more markets become more normalized in terms of recycling through fleets and for other channels and what have you. So, but that's led to a 3-year 60, a 1.7% decrease. Now that is obviously stands out against the backdrop of 0.4. I think the main driver with the lower movement there is definitely to do with the volume in the market. There are lots of volume, and that's just the stuff which we've captured, which has been sold. There's obviously a chunk which hasn't been sold, but the good news is that demand's there for electric vehicles and might not be at the cap clean sort of pricing that vendors and sellers that would like, but they are selling and conversions are high, and I think demand is there, and demand is stretching as well across different sellers, independents of retail types. So it's, even though it looks I guess pretty negative, it's actually, there is a good news story there as well.
And is it, I mean, within that sector, is it across the board, or are there some notable sort of BEV price movements by make and model that you've seen sort of fluctuate in the data?
It's generally across the board. And I know the ones that I look after, Mini, for example, that's probably one of the biggest mainstream drops again this month. That's nearly 8%, so nearly £1,000 for this month, which seems really unusual because you look at the price point of that car and it looks very, very cheap. But it is across the board, so it's not just. But I think where there's more concentrated volumes of certain models and trims coming in, it seems to just push the price down even further. There's no shortage of Mini Cooper electrics in the market. And there's other brands in there as well. Volkswagen ID3, that's down 6%, or £850. Subaru Solterra, appreciate that's not a massive volume model, but again, that's nearly 7%, and again, £1,000. So there's a bit of a trend across the board for electric vehicles. So yeah, it's been fascinating to watch and to monitor. But some of them, you look at the price point, like I said, you're sort of scratching your head a little bit, but that's the way the market's driven it.
And I mean, you mentioned stock concentration, and that seems to be a common feedback of the market at the minute. Is that just in BEVs, or is that general that we are now starting to see a bit of duplicated stock concentration that is causing some of this weakness?
It's across the board. So certain brands, or certain certain parent brands, there's a concentration of stock for a lot of models, and that could be petrol, that could be hybrid, and it just seems that it's across the board, but it's more concentrated, I guess, in electric vehicles in a minute, because it's still a relatively, and I mean relatively, new concept for some, especially for some sellers. I look at some of the fleet sales in a minute, and if they're predominantly made up of 50, 60, 70% of each and every sale as an electric vehicle, it seems to be over concentrated in certain channels, which is potentially not helped. But it is across the board, Phil.
Yeah, and just before we break for the midway jingle there, how are the hybrids and PHEVs and ICE vehicles performing? I mean, we're talking there about EVs against the backdrop of a 0.4 being down 1.7. How's the performance for the hybrid and ICE sectors?
So plug-in hybrid was down 0.7 at 3 years. That equates to around £130. The next worst performing fuel type, if you like, is diesel, down 0.3. Standard hybrid, so normal, I guess self-charging if you want to brand it like that, down 0.1. Petrol was actually flat overall. So there's quite a little bit of a variation through the fuel types there. But yeah, it's like I said, it's been very interesting, and things moving in all different directions. So there's plenty of increases and there's plenty of decreases across the board for all types, really.
Excellent. Well, we'll be back after this brief break with more from Jeremy and Cap HPI's February trade values.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on this special weekday episode of Motor Trade Radio, powered by Motors and Cazoo.
Welcome back. Now, Jeremy, each month you analyse retail activity by days to sell. How did they perform in February compared to January?
So it's a slight improvement in terms of our retail database and what we track. Overall market, so all fuel types across everything, improved from 53 days to 51, so a 2-day increase. Performance is probably a little bit more varied in terms of retailer type. Car supermarkets, probably the strongest speed to sell, turning in the stock around about 46 days on average. Franchise dealers followed just behind at 47, and independents are slightly behind, again down at 61. But all three channels actually recorded a modest increase, which was good.
And were there any specific trends that you saw by fuel type?
So BEVs continue to be the fastest selling fuel type, which sometimes doesn't link up with the trade market in terms of obviously the overall movement down. But yeah, that was the fastest selling fuel type overall at 46 days. But car supermarkets again leading the way with that, and they were down to 39 days for selling BEVs. So it was interesting to see that that's quite a significant drop compared to January. Franchise dealers are turning BEVs around 51 days, and independents just behind at 53 days. So demand remains strong for BEVs in the retail market between 3 and 5 years, and the average is continuing to decrease. I think if you look at petrol and you look at hybrids, they're down as well slightly based on January. So I think there's a little bit more of a retail appetite out there. From January into February. January was okay, we believe. I think February's still just okay, but things are moving in the right direction, which is always positive.
And you also polled the views of the auction houses. What were they telling you about stock levels and trade demand over the course of the month?
So demand is probably demand is not as increased as what it was from January. But I think within our survey, it was a 91% increase over December, which is probably not too difficult to understand
Yeah.
from December into January. But yeah, 91% increase. So the market became pretty full of buyers across the market. But into February, reports, feedback we had back, by 50% was demand was around the same, and around 42% said it increased. So a little bit more of a mix. Actually, 8% said it decreased. So a bit more of a varied feedback, I would say, compared to January.
And finally, Jeremy, I mean, what's CAP's view on? I mean, we now said at the start, we days as we sort of start to look out for the new plate in March. First quarter is a crucial period for both the dealers and the manufacturers in terms of that market
Yeah.
share and volume. I mean, what's your view as we sort of move into March now, and what typically has the impact on used car values look like in March?
So March, we usually see a very small decrease, around zero point 0.2 or zero point 0.3. We think it's probably going to be something, I guess, similar to what we've seen in previous months. Although this is a plate change month. There's lots of activity out there. There's lots of new car activity out there. Lots of very strong new car deals. That could be potentially just turning people away from some used car, which they may be looking at, and maybe looking at some new cars. That could in turn just put a little bit more pressure around the used car market, sort of sub 3 years or around 3 years. It's I think if you exclude the two COVID years, I think it's a 0.2 drop overall. I think if you're a betting man, I think it's probably going to be in and around that, maybe slightly less. Easter does come a little bit earlier this year again. I appreciate Good Friday's not until the 3rd of April, but the school holidays break up. The schools break up before then, so there could be a little bit disruption. But then our cutoff is always usually a week or so before the end of the actual month, so we can build product and put it into all of our products for our customers. So yeah, I think it's probably going to be heading in a similar direction as to where we've been possibly this month, maybe a little bit worse, depending on, I guess, activity and demand and who's away, absentees, etc.
Yeah, I think in general, I think from the volatility that we've had over previous years, I think it sounds like it's quite stable from February going into March, and what we expect to see in March, a bit more stability. But as you said earlier, we may start to see a bit more of that volume of vehicle concentration coming into the market.
Yeah, I think fleets are going to be. We're getting back to a more normalised market in that sort of sub 3-4 year old. So we're going to see higher recycles of stock. But that's good news, because the market will always need stock. Used cars will always be sold. We could just see a little bit more than we have done in previous years, based on extensions and normal recycles, etc. So it's definitely going to be interesting. It'll be a very interesting month.
Sounds like more of the same as usual now, doesn't it? I think
Indeed.
Curtis and I, it seems to be that kind of thing, and so we were expecting probably a bit more of that. A similar year that we had last year with sort of a bit more uncertainty and volatility, but hopefully a bit more, as you just said there, a bit more of a return to a more normalised market activity with those defleets, etc. But I mean, as always, Jeremy, I mean, it's always great to get you on, to sort of bring the editorial content to life for the listeners, to sort of talk through some of those highlights. But as always, for the listeners, we do recommend that if you want to get into the detail, have a read of the editorial. Obviously, a lot of detail on there. And reach out to Jeremy, Chris, Dion, and others over there at CAP HPI. But if you want to check out the full editorial, then go over to cap-hpi.com where you'll get the full editorial. And if not, then I'm sure, Jeremy, you probably shared it along others through your social channels.
Yeah, publication day yesterday, so that our social channels were busy yesterday in sharing that. But yeah, if anybody needs any further detail, then yeah, feel free to reach out.
Excellent. And there's no webinars coming up yet or anything, is there? There's nothing on the horizon?
I think there's one planned for, towards the end of March from memory. I don't think a date's actually been set in stone yet, but again, that will be shared. Yeah.
Keep an eye on that for when it starts to come through then.
Indeed.
Excellent.
Well, that's all for this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast. Many thanks to Jeremy for joining us. Thank you for listening. We're back with all the big car retailing headlines this weekend. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors and Cazoo. Philip and Curtis will be back with the week's big motor retailing headlines on Saturday.